Good evening, Alex.
Good evening.
Good evening, and welcome to the CASAA update for the week of 6/20/2016. How are you this week?
Good. I'm
Good.
looking I'm looking forward to this week actually.
Oh, okay. All right. So, what has been going on?
Um well, uh I guess we've sort of talked about all of the updates that I have. You put a bunch of links in my Skype chat for me to look over, and I honestly haven't had time. I'm in the process of getting my phone switched over to my name
Ah,
now.
okay.
This was a phone that I carried over from my previous job, so
Right.
they've been paying for it for 6 months, and
Wow.
like they've been so slammed that they just haven't had an opportunity to get it switched over. So
Okay.
that's what I've been dealing with for the past hour.
Ah, that sounds like fun.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
the vaping related news, I
Okay.
guess, that everybody wants to, that's why people listen to this.
Hmm.
Um, I guess at the top of the list, people in Pennsylvania should be aware that the 40% wholesale tax on vapor products is still a thing.
Hmm.
And I had spoken to Chris Hughes from Pennsylvania, I guess this weekend and last week. And they're very concerned because it sounds like this week is sort of crunch time for them. They have
Okay.
to get their budget in
Hmm.
by the 30th,
Okay.
if I remember that correctly. And so this week is sort of when everybody's going to be debating, making decisions, and so on. And so you had shared a link with me about Americans for Tax Reform
Yep.
is initiating a call campaign.
Hmm.
So people living in specific districts in Pennsylvania, uh, these are House districts, District 28, District 62, and Senate District 34 can expect um, what I sound like, you will be receiving phone calls, I believe, urging you to contact your lawmakers,
Yep.
which would be House Speaker Mike Turzai, House Majority Leader Dave Reed, and Senate Majority Leader Jake Corman, and call them and urge them to oppose any extra tax on vapor products. And of course, we have our engagement, which is currently active, sending emails, and there's even an option in there to find your lawmaker's contact information and give them a call. And we
Right.
provide talking points and all that wonderful stuff.
Yep.
So, Pennsylvania, get up, get on the phone, and call your lawmakers. Um, the other thing that I guess this is sort of old news, but it never really hurts to clarify things.
Hmm.
West Virginia passed a 7.5 cent per milliliter tax on e-liquid,
Yep.
and there was some confusion. I don't know if I think I might have misstated the kind of uh, parameters of this tax last week.
Hmm.
And I hope you had the opportunity to correct my misstatement in the
Hmm.
show notes. Um, but this is just a 7.5% tax per milliliter on e-liquid. There's no like extra wholesale tax. All of that was a lot of people were getting confused because the first part of the bill actually addressed a tax on other tobacco products,
Right.
and I believe they raised the taxes on cigarettes. Um, and I saw some actually reports about the West Virginia tax, and it completely neglected to mention the vapor tax.
Right.
Um, but this is just I hate to say just but it is limited to a tax, 7.5%, 7.5 cent tax on e-liquid
Yep.
per milliliter. Sorry, I'm not
Well,
speaking very well tonight.
well, no, no, but I mean, it really it could have been worse had it been like the 40% of wholesale and the 7%. That would have been 7.5 cents. I'm sorry, per milliliter. That could have been much worse. Which is what I. But the legislation is it's so confusing to read. It it's written in legalese.
Yeah, it was, and it doesn't seem to be very. well thought through. I mean, it's not a comprehensive kind of thing where they actually laid out the process by which, retailers or wholesalers or distributors are supposed to go through getting whatever license or registration they need to do with the tax commission. There's still a lot of questions about, it specifically says that the 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 person who sells the product to whoever in West Virginia is responsible for the tax, and they have to be registered with the tax commission. So does that mean that a wholesaler outside of the state of West Virginia has to get a license or register with the tax commissioner, and how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, exactly.
So there's a lot of questions that need to be answered by people doing business there, and it just wasn't very clear. And of course, as soon as this thing passes, people go into panic mode, and the effective date is July 1st. So a lot of people are sort of scrambling to figure out what they need to be doing. The kind of only real good news here is that the first payments aren't due until August 15th.
Right.
So, you have to start accounting for the taxes due starting on, sales that happen
Right.
July 1st, but the payments aren't due until a month and a half later. So I would assume, and there should just be an automatic caveat there, like whenever I say assume, that this is not legal advice,
Right.
but I would assume that you've got some leeway there for people to get registered with the tax commission and then, be compliant. But of course, the tax commission needs to come up with the appropriate process by which people apply or register or get licenses or whatever. So, and that is all sort of written. That language is basically in the bill. Is that the tax commission has to come up with the procedure. So, it's just it's unfortunate for people in West Virginia, and
It is.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, tax issue aside, this is one of those things that comes with new taxes is all this additional paperwork and record keeping, and this I'm only bringing this up because these small taxes don't sound like a whole lot, but there is a paperwork burden associated with it. There's all this other stuff that people have to do in order to be compliant that it arguably applying for your business license is relatively easy by comparison. So I haven't heard a whole lot of chatter about this lately, but I remember last year there were several times when the tax discussion came up. You always have these people that sort of believe that, well, if we just let them tax it a little bit, it legitimizes the industry and they'll kind of leave us alone on other issues. That's I understand where that motivation comes from,
Sure.
from another industry where we're talking about daylighting something and making the industry legit. But, the vapor industry is already legitimate. They're already selling a legal product. That's not what this is about. And, taxes bring with them a whole other slew of issues. So, just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah. I thought, I don't know if you saw it, but the thing about Chicago was pretty interesting.
Delaying the tobacco tax.
Yeah. They got sued.
Yeah, I feel like that was a thing that was discussed early on. But if you have more details about that, I'm happy to hear them.
Oh, no. I'm just saying I think it's great that they got sued in court because they say it's actually illegal.
Now, this is
For
for
them.
the hike in tobacco tax. This doesn't affect
Yes.
the paper tax, right?
I don't know. A proposed tobacco tax increase in Chicago was scheduled to go into effect on July 1st has been delayed as the city has agreed to wait till the 60th day after the circuit court enters a decision as to whether or not the city is allowed to implement such a tax. So the people who sued them were the International Premium Cigar and Pipe Retailers Association because that was considered an OTP, an other tobacco tax. Weren't we considered OTP, or were we taxed as a vapor product? That was the confusion I had about it.
Now that you mention it, I would have to research that. I do know that, I mean, DC
Hmm.
they redefined other tobacco product to include uh, vapor products, if I
Right.
remember correctly.
Hmm.
Um, but I feel that I believe Chicago just separately
Taxed. Yeah.
separately taxed electronic cigarettes.
Oh,
I think the confusion might be that for the purposes of the indoor clean air law,
right.
they defined tobacco product to include vapor product,
Yeah.
smoking to include vaping, and so on. But for some reason, I think that for the taxes,
Uh-huh.
uh, e-cigarettes or electronic cigarette smoking liquid or some stupid
Uh-huh.
term like that was used.
Okay.
And because I remember this question coming up before
Hmm.
that Chicago may not, in terms of uh, I think Illinois there's some preemption there that the
Hmm.
state sets the taxes and cities aren't allowed to do that on their own.
Yeah.
Um, but since vapor products were classified separately for the purposes of taxation,
That's
that
not a good
this
direction.
lawsuit doesn't necessarily apply.
Well, I mean, it might for smokeless, which would be good for them because they're also a reduced risk product.
Right. Yeah. So this would be a good thing yeah, seeing as OTP is something that the state would cover, this might be a good thing for snus and
Hmm.
smokeless tobacco. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you can't get a victory every time, but sometimes you can get the wheels of justice to spin in the way. So it was just interesting reading about it, you know.
Yeah.
So there was that. So what is going on with the bottle cap situation? Do you know?
Well, I saw that you had dropped that in the chat, and I actually have this newsletter keeps haunting me, and we're supposed to, I have our spring newsletter like almost done,
Right.
and there's a section in there in red about the July 26th effective date of the um, is it Child Nicotine Poisoning
Poisoning
Prevention
Prevention Act
Act
of
of
2015.
2015.
Yep.
Yes, which requires all e-liquid to be sold in child-resistant packaging
Mhm.
that is compliant with U.S. code.
Right.
Um, and so like I said, I didn't have the chance to read whatever article you put in my
Oh,
feed.
it wasn't an article. Somebody was saying they were getting letters from the state that they were going to start coming in and inspecting
And
the bottle caps.
what state was that?
Oh, I don't hang on.
Because several states, a handful of states have already adopted
Sure.
basically this language,
Hmm.
and this was one of the things that it's CASAA wasn't necessarily. Um, I mean, we weren't actively out there pushing for this, but it was one of those talking points that I think a lot of people had adopted was that if the state was going to make this child resistant packaging requirement, it needed to be consistent with US code.
Hmm.
And so several states actually did do that. It's the Poisoning Packaging Prevention Act.
Right.
It's is it it's not
Um,
is it chapter 16 section 1700
yeah.
is kind of the general area that you would see it.
Um,
And
well,
and
actually, it's the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission is sending out letters to the retailers they can find.
okay.
That they're getting a letter that I guess they're sending out the requirements and telling them that they could be um, checked by the state so that
Yeah.
they need to be in compliance. So yeah,
Yeah,
not.
that's happening.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay.
This is something that the industry was alerted to in January, at the
Hmm.
end of January, when President Obama signed this act into law,
Hmm.
and it has taken kind of second chair to FDA deeming regulations. A lot of people are so focused on August 8th and doing what they need to do to be compliant for that. But this child resistant packaging thing has been,
Yeah.
um,
Overlooked.
it should have been on everybody's mind for, the past 5 months.
Hmm.
And I do know that trade associations, I believe Savada alerted their membership to this issue.
Yeah.
And this is something that I think we've all been aware of.
Well, I think a lot of the smaller standalone retailers that maybe aren't members are just shocked. They're baffled. Yeah. So, but
Yeah,
yeah.
and it's I guess that is where the compliance monitoring will take place. It seems more uh, cost effective, honestly, for enforcement agencies to go to manufacturers and say, hey, uh, this you need to be compliant. Here you go. But I guess if you really want to catch people off
Oh,
guard and collect some fines,
yeah.
then you go to the the
Mhm.
independent vapor shop that's kind of tucked away and
Yeah.
perhaps in some sort of information desert. You know,
Yeah. Well, I mean, here's the thing. I think most people don't know that whoever, if you bottle your own e-liquid, whoever sells you your bottles can send you a certificate, certification that those bottles meet that specific or those specific set of requirements required by law, and you can display that in your shop, you know, so
yeah.
that
At the
everybody
at the
knows.
at the very least, you have it on file, and so when the uh, enforcement people come by, you say,
Yep.
"Yep, I got
Got it.
letters from all of these manufacturers, and all of these bottles are compliant." So,
Yep. So,
but it again, and it should be emphasized, there are all kinds of child-resistant packaging
sure.
things out there, but if you're getting your bottles from overseas, there's a chance that it is not compliant with U.S. code. So and even in the state laws that were passed, it's very specifically worded that it should be compliant with U.S. code, and there's a very specific testing protocol that's laid out
Hmm.
in our laws that needs to be followed.
Yep.
So yeah, that's and somewhere in that letter it should say, tested in accordance with whatever
Yes.
title this, that, and the other thing. So
Yeah. So,
yeah,
yeah. No. I just thought it was kind of interesting that there were still people freaking out about it, because how much have we talked about it every week? Every single week for months we've talked about it, and I'm assuming other vape show hosts have talked about it, and I'm sure there were articles about it. It's surprising to me that it's not a bigger issue to people.
well, 95% of the vape media that's out there is product porn. So I don't actually have the same confidence that a lot of this word is reaching
You know,
the kind of disparate groups that are out there that they're doing buy
you're
sell trade. They're talking about the latest atomizer or e-liquid,
sure.
and not necessarily paying attention to um, what the regulations are going to be. And this is just this industry and the consumer base. It's made up of people that are finding out about these products, today, this week,
Yeah,
last week.
sure.
There's all kinds of new faces moving into this space, and um, I thought there was a lot to get caught up on 3 years ago.
Yeah.
I can't imagine walking into this today and somebody saying, "Hey, FDA deeming regulations." Like, just I mean, that's quite a lot to absorb. So,
Yeah.
and I get phone calls and
Hmm.
emails from people, um, you know, a few a week that are opening up a new business. They're set to open up their business in a couple weeks, and they're curious about the regulations. It's like,
Wow.
you've gotten 2 weeks away from your doors opening, and you're just now hearing about this. It's
That's
it's yeah.
Yeah, no, it is. Yeah. Yeah, faith in humanity dims a little bit again. But yeah. Um, so I don't. Is that about it? Oh, somebody was having a meeting tonight about Tobacco 21,
I believe you said it was Portland, Maine.
Portland, Maine. Yep. So Portland, Maine is in the midst of having their Tobacco 21 meeting. This includes vapor products. So
Yeah,
I
I'm
don't.
not sure what the cities in Maine are like. My view of all northeastern states now is sort of tainted by Massachusetts.
Oh,
Um,
well, yeah.
oh, wait, actually, since we're in the northeast region of the country,
Okay.
but anyway, I'll get to that.
Okay.
But so I don't know if this is the city or local Department of Health or what have you. And I'm just hearing about this, tonight. So there's not much I can put out about it, but I'll have to follow up and see how that goes. Um, but speaking of the Northeast, Rhode Island managed to get through their entire session, and I believe they did not successfully pass any threatening anti-vaping legislation. I had the pleasure of going up there for a committee hearing, which included a bill to raise the purchase age to 21.
Yep.
And I talked about that on a previous update. I believe the hearing was sort of in disarray because the committee chair had been indicted for something. I can't
Yeah.
remember. I think I remember what, but we won't talk about it. There was a joint task force, and FBI and state police were investigating the committee chairperson. So at the beginning of the hearing, they basically came out and said, we're just going to hold all of these bills over for further study, but we'll, hear testimony just to, keep
Yeah.
things going.
Mhm.
So that bill didn't really go anywhere. There was an indoor vaping ban that made it to the House floor. And I have to thank, I know I'm going to mess up her last name. I want to say it's Lisa Corleone.
Okay.
Uh,
No, I know
she's
who you're talking about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Lisa, she's been very active in Rhode Island,
Hmm.
and I believe she owns a vape shop. And so she was actually at the 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 Capitol to watch the House floor hearing, and posted up a video of the vapor debate.
Hmm.
And there was I think about maybe a dozen representatives that ended up opposing the bill. But I kind of kept the list of all the arguments against the
Hmm.
indoor vaping ban. But it was a House bill. It only made it to the floor of the House. It was passed by the House, but was not sent over to the Senate. And the legislature adjourned without anything else going on. So congratulations, Rhode Island, and a special thank you for all the people that were working hard to keep this legislation at bay. I did hear during the debate, one of the representatives actually, I didn't keep it in my notes, but it was, oh, what did we have? I forget who said it, but one of the representatives actually got up and said, well, nicotine causes cancer. Um, but he was quickly corrected by another representative. Um, Now that story kind of sucks without like telling you names,
Right.
but it was good to hear that that misinformation was very quickly corrected by another representative. So
Yeah.
kudos to those in Rhode Island who stood up and set the record straight.
It's too much, isn't it? It's
It
there's so
is.
much. It's almost hard to know what to talk about or what people know or what they don't know because I showed you stuff today I know you haven't seen and I know you see stuff I don't see. And yeah.
Yeah, I've actually been spending my day trying to get the newsletter finished
Newsletter
up,
done.
and I'm actually taking some continuing education stuff to be a better CASAA employee.
Oh,
Grateful for that opportunity, and trying to, I'm a sucky student, but trying to really make the most of it. So um, yeah.
that's awesome.
Um, yeah, but it's yeah, I think the other thing that's really on in the forefront of people's minds is
Hmm.
the Indiana law taking effect. I believe that takes effect on the 30th.
Yeah.
I could be wrong about that. I have admittedly kept Indiana sort of at a distance. The people on the ground in Indiana have um, now, I want to say that they have a pretty good understanding of the law, but the law itself is kind of been a source of confusion. So
Yeah.
I have ultimately sort of deferred to their analysis and their experience with it, and strongly recommend that, if anybody is curious about how that's going, to seek out the folks in Indiana.
Sure.
Evan McMahon, Amy Lane, Hoosier Vapors,
Yeah.
and of course the Right to Be Smoke Free Coalition
Yeah.
is still working on this issue. So those are excellent sources of information for anybody that's curious. And of course, there's been some news articles coming out.
Yeah.
A couple of weeks from the drop dead date here,
Hmm.
and you have some pretty harsh warranted criticism of the regulations that will basically shrink the industry in Indiana down to 6 manufacturers.
Shrink.
Um,
Yeah. No, shrink is the right word. It's yeah. It's prohibition by dictate.
well, it's not really prohibition because there are manufacturers that are still
Well,
allowed to be in
yeah,
business.
but there's
It's
six
just
of
this
them.
sort of you
Yeah.
know it's I don't know what's the opposite of the invisible hand. Um,
The big visible nanny is standing over yelling. I don't know,
yeah.
but I've seen. I live in a place called Charlotte County, and we have an anaerobic septic system. Every place here does, and I know this has nothing to do with it, but looking at the Indiana law reminded me a lot of the regulations for that here. We only have one vendor in, no, I'm sorry, two vendors in the state that are trained to care for these systems, and you have to get a service contract with them every December, and it's
Hmm.
$500 just to live here. I'm like, that's just, it's crazy. It's a crazy amount of money, and it's very, it almost smacks of someone giving someone they're related to a favor. Can I prove it? No, but it's just, it's how it looks. And it reminds me a lot of that regulation in Indiana, you know?
Yeah, well, the accusations of crony capitalism have been thrown, and are certainly warranted. I mean, this is reduces this down to one security company that can satisfy um, the requirements.
Requirements. Yeah.
They keep saying that there's a second one that's being reviewed, but even then, it's kind of like that. It's built into the law apparently
Mhm.
that if you don't get your application in before June 30th,
Yep.
you never have the opportunity to do
Hmm.
this again. It's kind of like liquor licenses in Pennsylvania,
Hmm.
or I don't know how other states run their liquor licenses, but the state, basically says there are so many liquor licenses available, and you can purchase one of these, or buy one from somebody who's selling theirs, which liquor licenses sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Sure they do.
Um, so so yeah, it's a very it's very strong arm regulation and
Yeah,
absolutely unnecessary.
I agree. Um, so is, I don't want to say is that it for this week because there's always something one of us forgets to say, but I guess that's it for this week, Alex. Let you get back to your continuing education courses.
I think so. That should suffice. We've
Okay.
managed to fill a lot of time.
Yeah. Well, thank you for everything you do for us, Alex. And we'll see you next week.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay.